Now, Somewhere in Time is Iron Maiden's 6th album, and the history of this album is quite different to what it was on their previous, say, 3 or 4 albums. And after the monumental Live After Death, World Slavery Tour, which was like 192 dates in 13 months, they were completely burnt out, and they took a really long and very needed and earned break for about 6 months, which is why this is the first album that was released non-consecutively, annually. And this album is a bit of an oddball in Iron Maiden's 80s albums. It's definitely less memorable, and it's quite famous use of things like synths and stylistically a bit of a change compared to their earlier, say, 3 or 4 albums. Now, the history with Bruce on this album is quite interesting. Now, Bruce Dickinson was the most burnt out from the World Slavery Tour. He, as a vocalist, touring a lot, is very demanding on vocalists, especially, it's demanding on the whole band, but especially the vocalist. Now, he wanted to kind of change the style of the band even more. He wanted to go more acoustic, slower, more kind of less big, and just kind of easier, simpler kind of music, more basic. And the rest of the band, especially Steve Harris, completely rejected his idea, because Bruce Dickinson is not the leader of the band. Steve Harris is the leader of the band. Iron Maiden is basically owned by Steve Harris at this point, and basically for all of Iron Maiden's existence. So they just completely rejected this idea, and they wouldn't take this idea on board till No Prayer for the Dying, but we'll get there when we get there. So, that's the kind of the main reason why this album famously has no writing credits from Bruce Dickinson, because all his material was basically rejected by the band. And that's kind of, I'm not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing, because on Power Slave and Seventh Son, the albums next to it, Bruce had some really good writing credits, but this album still has some really good writing on it, although the writing and the performance isn't what it was on Power Slave, and was not as good at what it was going to be on Seventh Son. So yeah, this album does kind of not stick out, but kind of seems like a bit of a weaker album, at least for their 80s. Now, the production is still great. It's still huge. The sound is just lush and beautiful, and the artwork is also great. I love the cool futuristic vibe, the kind of Blade Runner vibe. Now, a very famous part of this album's history is obviously the use of the synthesizers. The first time they use them, they would also use synthesizers on the next album, Seventh Son, but that would be keyboard synthesizers, whereas this is guitar synthesizers. And I actually really like it. A lot of people say it kind of ruins the classic Maiden sound, but I really like it. I think it adds an extra layer to Iron Maiden's music, and I really like it. I think it really adds to some of the songs. Right, so the first track is Caught Somewhere in Time, obviously the semi-title track. Obviously it's not an actual title track, but it's, close. And this song is a pretty good opener. It's a little bit long and repetitive, sort of, I think it's around the 6 or 7 minute mark. And it's not one of Iron Maiden's most memorable openers. It's kind of repetitive, but it has a catchy chorus, and it's definitely a good listen. Now, the next track is Wasted Years. Now, this obviously has the ridiculously famous kind of guitar intro, and also, as well as the great guitar intro, has a great bass line. And yeah, this song is just really good, really catchy, really showing off the band's technical talent, which they definitely still had at this point, even though they weren't quite performing as good as they were a couple years ago. And yeah, overall, this song is really, really great. And then we move on to Sea of Madness. Now, Sea of Madness is a little bit of a fillerish track for me, mainly because there's just nothing that special about it. It doesn't really stand out, and kind of has a bit of a weak chorus that doesn't feel like it's progressing the album very well. And then the next track is Heaven Can Wait. Now, Heaven Can Wait is kind of a bit more of an interesting track. Has some really good synthesizer moments, definitely, and it's definitely has some cool effects here and there. This album is generally quite effects heavy, which is I do quite like, when the band spends the time to make effects work and not just kind of have them just to have them. They really do add to the music, in my opinion. But it kind of suffers from some of the things that Sea of Madness suffers, not the most memorable of choruses in the world, but, it's not a bad track. And then we move on to Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. Yeah, that's a long title. And this song is kind of similar to Sea of Madness. It's not that great. Has some pretty good guitar moments and a great opening riff too. I like that opening riff. But again, weak chorus and kind of feels like a filler. It doesn't really go very far. You know, a lot of albums, you know, they feel like you're progressing as you go along. There's this, you're just kind of trotting along the album at this point. Now the next track is Stranger in a Strange Land, and this is a bit of an oddball. First, before I actually talk about the music, this song has a really cool singles cover. I really like the single cover for this song, and yeah, the actual music has a pretty catchy riff and some pretty cool sections, but overall it's a little bit repetitive. Kind of has a bit of a weak chorus, which is kind of a recurring theme with this album at points. And it has the famous kind of Brave New World lyric, which obviously, I don't know if that influenced the decision to call their 12th album Brave New World. Could have, I don't know. I don't think there's any information about that. If there is, you know, let me know. But yeah, overall, it's not terribly strong song. So, moving on to Deja Vu, and this is actually a really good song. I really like this song off this album. Definitely has some good good instrumental sections. A great opening riff, to be honest. And but some parts it's a little bit lyrically boring, lyrically a bit repetitive. But it does have some really great sections, and yeah, I do quite enjoy the song Deja Vu. And then the big epic, Alexander the Great. Now, this is Steve's one of the more underrated epics, you know, mainly because of how monumentally awesome his other 80s epics are, but this epic is really good too. Has the kind of opening, haunting, dark kind of narration, and then this goes into a really cool drum beat, which then follows with, obviously, the guitar line, great riffs in there, some really good bass line, just instrumentally a really good song this is. But some of the instrumental parts go on a little bit too long, which is kind of a recurring theme with Steve's epics, but usually the music is good enough that it's not too big of a deal, but this epic, it kind of drags on a bit, some of the longer instrumental sections, but it has some really good lyrics. Obviously Alexander the Great tells the story of, you know, him, you know, conquering land and at such a young age, you know. But yeah, this epic is kind of like the album, a bit of an oddball in that it's a good song, definitely a good epic, but it can sometimes come off as weak when you compare it to the other ones, which is kind of a theme for this album, to be honest. And yeah, that concludes the track by track. Now, Somewhere in Time, as I've mentioned, is definitely a solid album, and it's not one that you can just overlook, you know. I really enjoy the fact that Iron Maiden decided to do something different, decided to use the synths and add some cool effects, which are not just throwaway, they're genuinely good effects that add to the music, and I do definitely quite enjoy this album, though I will definitely say that it is not as strong as a lot of the albums that they've done in the 80s. So anyway, that concludes the review. I'm going to give Somewhere in Time a 7.5 out of 10. Later.